If you're moving to Orlando or you're already in Orlando and you're considering building new construction, then this is the video for you. I'm going to talk about my personal experience when I built a home here in Orlando and what the pitfalls and concerns and issues that I ran into. Let's go. What's up, everyone? My name is Cameron Haas, a realtor here in Orlando. And this is your first time hitting the channel. Consider liking, subscribing, and hitting that bell icon so that way you can be notified every time I drop a new video. So I always say in every video, and I'm gonna say again, we always have people reaching out to us when they're making the move to Orlando, and we absolutely love it. So if you're making the move to Orlando and you need help, call, text, email, whatever you have to do. We have your back when moving to Orlando. So without that, getting into this video. So this video is all about like our personal experience as a family when we built a home here in Orlando, why we did it, and some of the issues we ran into when doing it. So when we initially were leaving California, making the move to Orlando, we really didn't know what we were getting into at the time when we had made that first discovery trip. So we came out here. You know, thankfully I was already licensed in Florida. Like I already had, some idea of going on, right? Like I had an idea of kind of what we were looking for and getting into. And we started looking at the market at the time and some of the homes available in the areas, and just weren't impressed. Not that there's anything crazy. It's just with our budget and where we wanted to stay, we were like, man, like it's just, I'm not really sure what we can do here. Lo and behold, that's when we started looking into the possibility of new construction. Now, if you've never built a home before, it's not like the simplest thing, right? Like and one thing, I think the biggest factor, like there's always issues. Like, I don't care if you're buying, selling, like there's always issues in real estate, but with this one, it's time. Like it takes time. Like a home isn't built overnight. There is no cookie cutter homes unless obviously you're buying in a community. That can be a different scenario, and I'll touch on that here in a second. But more into the why we did it. So when we came out to Orlando, we knew that it just wasn't fitting. And we had that conversation, and my wife was like, look, I think I want to get something that I couldn't get in California. And in that case, we're like, well, it looks like we're looking at new construction, mainly because where our budget was and where we wanted to be in our budget. So also, like if you're coming from like a state like California or, like in a big city area, like you probably new construction, unless it was in a community, probably wasn't even on your radar. And it definitely wasn't on ours. Because in California, like not only do you need like a substantial down payment when it came to building a home, it just wasn't going to happen, especially at the time once COVID hit, right before we made our move, or even actually before that in like 2019, 18. It's just like, there's no way. Like we were just like, yeah, it's off the table. Like it was way out of our budget, or like not even like the time, and it just nothing fit. And like, it just wasn't going to happen. But when we came to Orlando, once that was brought up, we're like, okay, well, let's start looking at builders and see what we can run into. So we finally found a builder, because we knew we didn't want to have an HOA. Like there's nothing really wrong with them per se. We're just not that type of people. Like I don't need another group telling me what to do. It's just how I am. If you're like that, trust me, I get you. Let me know in the comments below if you're totally okay with HOAs and you think it's a good thing, because I'm happy to have that conversation. But we knew we didn't want an HOA. So a lot of new construction communities have an HOA in place because you're buying a community. And while like, yeah, you might be able to have a home in 4 to 6 months, depending on the community and on storm, there's a ton of factors that go into it, but like, that's like your rough time frame. And a lot of times like the financing is easier. You can just do a normal financing because the community is already in place. The bank it's like they already have model homes, and like the system's safe for you to have a normal loan and process. Well, when you don't want an HOA, you're looking at buying a standalone home, finding the land, getting a construction loan, like you're doing all these crazy things. Now, in our situation, we came across a company that built steel and concrete homes here in Orlando and all of Florida, but they're only local to this market, which is common. So when you leave a lot of expensive areas, you start to see more medium, small size builders that are on the come up. Right. And we found one of those, and I am a huge skeptic. Like that's how I do everything, is I'm like, I take nothing at face value. I'm like, okay, that's great. Like, let's start looking into like, what have you built? Like in my situation, like I'm a veteran, so I'm using the VA construction loan. And by the way, if you're a veteran and you didn't know that you can do a VA construction loan, let me know in the comment below, call, text, email. Like, we need to have a conversation because it's the greatest thing ever. But even if you're not looking, so like for the VA construction loan, right, you're doing 0% down. And one thing I also want to mention, that if you're not, like, you're looking at probably around at least 10%. Like, it can be higher. Like, it all plays in your specific financial situation. So reach out if you need help with that, and we're happy to have that conversation. Now, with this medium-sized builder, the cool thing is like they had some communities they were building in the state, but they had already been building multiple homes and standalone lots. And thankfully, so when a lot of builders, they have a lender that works with them. And it's not, most of the time it can be beneficial. A lot of factors play into that. In this situation, we were able to find we just like, hey, if you use our lender, we're going to give you up to 4% in closing costs. Now, different loan types will prevent them from giving you a certain amount back on the price for the build. But in this situation, we were able to get 4% back, which is great because it pretty much covers all our closing costs. And I'm putting like almost virtually nothing down other than a $5,000 builder's deposit in order to get the process started. So going back to, we found the builder, and one thing I always recommend everyone to do, right, when you're doing standalone builders is like, whether you're going cookie cutter, like, hey, these are the models that we've already been building like we did, or you're going full custom. Like, you always want to look into the builder. You want to look at their practices. Like, how many homes have they built? Are they just in this area? How big are they? Like, who owns a company? Sometimes even when it's a smaller builder, like, who owns a company? Like, have they been failing at a lot of companies and not have a good track record? In this case, they had a decent track record. And I was like, okay, they're not new. It's like 2014 they started. And like, okay, so it's new for builders. They're not a big national brand. But then I was able to find out and reach out to clients that have already used them and find out, it's like, hey, like for me, like, right, using the VA construction loan, like I knew about it before. Being a veteran, like I help a lot of veterans. I've never actually gone through it myself, let alone see anyone get it in California. Like, I used to call like so many lenders, like, hey, you do this here? No, they're like, no, 50, like it's like 30-50% down, like regular conventional construction loan. Like, we don't do VA loans in California. Go figure. So thankfully, they're like, actually, they had proof, and they're like, hey, we closed on 3 different VA construction loans, and in the year we were talking to them. I'm like, okay, fantastic. I'm like, so now there's proof. I was able to verify that everything went great. I got to talk with them, like, hey, yeah, this, because thankfully people are just, most of the time they're really friendly. So if you're willing to reach out and ask, like, you actually will get a lot more answers than you think. So we vetted the builder. We're like, all right, we're doing this. Now, the next step is like that time component. Like, you need to make sure that you have time to wait for it to be constructed. And what are you going to do during that time? Are you going to rent, whatever? In our situation, since that thankfully was in that discovery trip period, because we're just not people to really put a lot of thought with. We do enough research and we make a decision, we do it. It's just how we are. So we did everything. We put the builder's deposit down. And the next step was like, oh crap, now we got to find a lot. So we extended our stay in that trip an extra month, and we were looking at lots, looking at things. Like, the problem is, obviously, when it comes to construction loans, like, let's say, like in our situation, right? Like, to stay in budget, which is crazy. There's only like 20,000 more than the condo we sold in freaking California. But we spent, the final cost ended up being, we were approved for about 350K as we were trying to stay at the time. Cause we were just trying to, like, we were moving here for Florida to save money, not freaking, just have a ton of money. But we were trying to stay in that price range. And the problem is like, when you start looking at lots, we were like, oh man, like, in order to be closer to Orlando, not be far west, towards Lakeland, we started to realize, like, lots started to get pricier. And it was kind of stressful because you're looking at lots, like, you can just show up and look, or like we're in bad areas, or like, lots it's a whole different game. Because a lot of times, like, you won't find all the information you need. You're gonna have to wait till the survey and all that stuff. So thankfully, the builder reached back out and say, hey, we had purchased 4 lots here in Davenport. And now obviously I know Davenport's going to be a little outside that area for a lot of people who want to live in like those nicer areas. But for our budget, that's just what we had to do. At the time, we did what we had to do. They had a lot there. We looked at it and I'm like, okay, this works. So thankfully, they already had a lot out the door. We pushed our budget up to about $390,000 out the door. to build a home. And now the next step is when it comes to choosing, let's say you have a builder, is that if you're going standalone, it's like, what are you going to do? So this builder, they had like 4 different models ranging from, below our budget, like standard, like 3-bed, 2-bath, all the way up to 5-bed, 3-bath, what we went with. Or they actually could go custom. Now the downfall is like once you went custom, a lot harder to get through the permit process. And what we found is like, so we realized talking with the builder and getting some good insight. It's like, okay, so we're just going to go with the biggest cookie cutter model you have. We saw the model home. We're like, okay, we're going to go with the biggest cookie cutter because it's within our budget. And we want to go something that we couldn't have before, which I think is why a lot of people move here. Is like, you want something that you didn't have in the place you're coming from. So we went with that. We got that all set up, and once we choose the lot, that's great. We closed on the lot, typical, like, 30-day escrow, all that stuff. Went through underwriting, got approved for the loan. And then now we're like, now what? And now you got to wait for the permits to go through. So we're like, oh man, what are we going to do? So we were like, okay, are we going to, I think we already had sold our condo in California. Like, we're all prepped to go. Everything's at our mom's house. Like, we're like, are we going to rent? We started looking at prices and renting and like all this stuff. And we're like, you know what? Rents are high enough. I still have the business in California at the time. We're like, okay, you know what? During this building process, we're going to go back to California while it's being constructed, because we can live with our mom. We can help out her. We can continue to work my business and keep our income. And then that way, once the home is built, we're already prepped. And honestly, we can get rid of more crap because, if you move, you just always have a lot of stuff. So, but what we found in that permit process is like that, at that time, the month was, it was end of October, first week in November of that year. And because of COVID, starting at that time, governments were so dialed back on their personnel. November came and went. December came and went. January came, and finally, after reaching out like every couple weeks, like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, we're still waiting on the permits. And we went with the standard home that in Polk County, they had actually already built several of those homes. So it's not like it was anything crazy that the building department had to approve, but still it took like how many months to even get approval. And finally we hit the end of that January and we got approval finally. But then the next step is you sit down and you finalize it. All right, they're ready to build. They laid out the whole process. Like, reapproving like the counters, the paint, like everything that we're gonna do, and like, hey, this is the rough time frame, which for our home was about 7 months is the average that it would take. And that was after the permit process. So keep in mind, you had to wait like 1, 2, 3 months before the building estimated time could even happen. It was absolutely crazy. And also, I forgot to mention, so right before the permits were done, when we were closing on that lot, which is Florida, we ran into, like, there's always issues and there's always stuff unknown, which is why it's always great to have a professional be able to walk you through everything. Is they surveyed the lot and they're like, the insurance and the team reach out and they're like, oh, hey, this is technically a flood zone. So now your insurance rate has to go up. So it went from 900 estimate to 1,200 because I had to have flood insurance per the bank's requirement. And it's a hit because then we had to pay that difference at the time. So like that's one thing I want to point out in new construction is that there's just random costs, right? Like you say like, oh, you're approved for the loan, you did your builder's deposit, it's all good. But then like we had random flood insurance. And now we had to pay out of pocket to make that difference at the time, right? Like even though the builder's paying closing costs, like we're fronting these random costs that come up in the beginning. So because you closed, and for at least for a VA construction loan, you closed twice. We closed for the land and then we closed when the house was completed. Now, through the building process, luckily, it just might just be small things that come up. Like, if thankfully this was before hurricane season when they started, so we were fine for the most part through there. But like if there's rain, storms, like it's not like you're building in a state like California that just doesn't really have that weather, like that can delay the process. So you have to understand that when you get into this, like there's a chance you just assume it's going to go longer. because that's like the safest thing that you can do. And I recommend is you just assume it's going to go longer. You have plans in place so that we can work around. Be flexible. Like you have to be flexible. And, through that process, clearing the land and all that stuff, like it's just, for the most part, thankfully, it was just small things, right? Like small delays, but thankfully the communication was the key, which is a big thing. Anyone, when you have a builder, is like, you need to be in communication. And sometimes it might require you to reach out on your own and say, hey, what's going on? Keep me updated. Because if you don't ask, you don't get. And it's the unfortunate thing, but that's just how it is. It doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean whatever. It's just, look, no one's going to care as much as you do because it's your home. And also keep in mind, like after that home's constructed, like even though it's a brand new construction, you still should do your own inspection and due diligence. Because like think about if you've ever bought a home before, you have that normal escrow period to do your inspection, the appraisal, and all these things. All that happens after the home's constructed. So even after waiting all that time, let's say 7 months, like we still had to go through that escrow process, but I want to make sure I have my inspections to make sure they did everything right. Like thankfully we had it's called like a builder's warranty for the next year afterwards. And it fixes anything that's wrong, and they have like a structural warranty, and every builder's gonna be different. Every situation's gonna be different. Make sure you read your contract when you sign it so you know what your warranties are. Well, thankfully we went through all that, like just minor stuff, delays, like I said, the weather, like it's just Florida. So there's gonna be small delays like that. For the most part, they push through, but you always, then you have your inspection at the end and you have your appraisal. And what's funny is before the house is even built, it got the first appraisal tentatively put it at like 400,000. So it was already worth more than we built it. It's not always the case. Understand that like when you're building, like if you're building new construction, like don't do it for profit in mind. Like you're doing this to get what you want, to make you happy, because the market couldn't satisfy that beforehand. So overall, like that was our experience building new construction. We were super happy with it because we couldn't find anything on the market, and we were able to build something that we couldn't have before. And it made us a situation that was level. Do I think it's the best thing for everyone? No, I don't. Because we had to be so flexible in that process. I mean, pretty much like if you build new construction, just assume it's going to take a year, at least. Unfortunately, I also have heard, had fellow friends that we met here that have gone through their own process and they went custom, and it took almost 12 months just to get permits approved on the home before even going through all the stuff that I just mentioned. So everyone wants to build new construction. Everyone just wants a brand new home, but there's a lot of things that go into it. And if you don't know, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know, reach out. Like we've experienced it on our team, and we are here to help you. If you're making the move to Orlando and you're like, hey, is new construction for me? Reach out. We will have that conversation. I absolutely love it. Call, text, email, whatever you need to do when you're moving to Orlando. We have your back. And with that, I will see you in the next video.